All right, BraveCo men, welcome back to the BraveCo podcast. This week's guest, I'm really excited about. He's such a man's man. He was an F-15 fighter pilot. He is a master business coach, life coach. He's written several #1 best-selling books. Of course, he's a great speaker and just an all-around great man. His name's Ed Rush. Ed, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man.
Jason, what's up, man? So awesome to be here. I think we talked about this, but I was doing a coaching session up in Bethel last May when BraveCo, your very first day of BraveCo. So I asked if I could sneak in the back door. I was in between meetings. I was there for the first hour, dude, and it kind of blew my mind what you've created there with your men. So I'm just telling you, I'm going to come back next time for the next time I come back. I'll come back for longer than an hour, but it was awesome, man.
Dude, yeah, June 12th through the 14th. So, man, I'd love to have you. That's our next conference.
There we go.
Yeah, hopefully you can come. But man, Ed, it's cool to have you on here. You have so much experience, honestly, just in business, in life, in making high pressure decisions, in being a man, in leading men, leading other people. And so hopefully we have enough time and a chance to dive into a bunch of different topics today. I really want to pick your brain. But before we do that, how did you go from being a fighter pilot to being in the business world? Why don't you take us back to the fighter pilot years? How did you get into flying jets and fighting for our country?
Yeah, it's a good place to start. So the first thing you should know is I failed kindergarten. I'm not proud of that fact. I always tell that part of the story because, first of all, I have 4 kids, and my daughter just recently graduated from kindergarten.
That's awesome.
And it's like the easiest stuff. Like you have to like not eat glue. That's pretty much.
I was gonna say, how do you fail? How do you fail kindergarten?
It's unbelievable. So I went to this Catholic school. I've date myself as this Catholic school back in the 70s. Okay, late 70s. And I had this. By the way, no offense to the Catholics or anything, but I like had this nun who was like, they were really into corporal punishment back then, and she just didn't like me. And I don't remember her name, but Cheech and Chong had a skit called Sister Mary Elephant, and in my brain, she's still Sister Mary Elephant. And literally the only conscious memory I have of kindergarten is the detention room, which was also doubled as the kitchen. It was one of those big metal kitchens. And so anyway, I always remember sitting there alone being punished when I was 5, dude, when I was 5, kindergarten. And the school was called St. Matthias. That was the name of the school because it was like a Catholic school. And, almost all the Catholic schools are named after like the primetime apostles like Peter and John. But this one was named Matthias, and it was fun because later on I looked up the story of Matthias, and Matthias was like picked late, like way after everything happened. I mean, dude doesn't even show up until Acts, right?
Yep.
So I thought that was pretty appropriate for me and my story because like that is my story, man. Like showing up, an hour late to the movie, like, hey, what's happening here, So that's the start. But yeah, I went in the Marine Corps. I did graduate from kindergarten the second time. Ended up in the Marine Corps. Right out of college, I was a college baseball player, Division I baseball player. My entire family, I have a sports lineage. My mom's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. My dad's one of the most famous basketball referees of all time. So I was expected to go into the sporting community, and I didn't. I went in the military and kind of annoyed everyone in my family. But it turned out I was pretty good at flying airplanes, despite a below average intelligence. Flying F-18s wasn't all that hard. Push the stick forward, the houses get bigger. Pull the stick back, the houses get smaller, kind of stuff. And ended up becoming an instructor in my squadron. Ended up going to Top Gun, the school, the real school name. The movie was named after. Nothing like that.
Are you?
I can answer any.
Are you the real Tom Cruise then?
So no, so I had someone introduce me once. I have this thing when I go speak at events. I always tell the meeting planner, so you can make anything up you want. And I had one person took me up on that, and they're like, "This actually is who Tom Cruise's character was based on." The fact was, I was in high school when the first Top Gun movie came out, so they weren't basing anything on my life. Maybe like Fast Times at Ridgemont High or something like that, if you go back that far. But yeah, I was a pretty good pilot. And ended up graduating from Top Gun. Ended up becoming an instructor at our weapons school in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
And right in the middle of all that, I decided I was going to be leaving the Marine Corps, and I didn't even know what I was going to do. Like I had no clue, dude. Like I was a believer at the time. I was not a person who had a conversation with God at all. That was back in 2006. I would have described myself as a cessationist back then.
Wow.
I believed in the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Bible. And I was good at the Bible, by the way. I knew the Bible really well. I just didn't know God very well. Like, so I didn't have that conversation going, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And almost on a whim, I wrote this little book. It was like an ebook, and it helped people become fighter pilots. And I put the book up online, and next thing it started selling. And then I created some CDs, and that started to sell. And I had, next thing, I had this 6-figure business, literally marketing like little products online, just teaching people fighter pilot stuff. And then I did that again, created a second business. That thing got successful. The first business went to about 150,000. The second business went.
Was it actually fighter pilots or people who wanted to be fighter pilots who bought the book, or was it just
like
people?
Dudes in high school? It was like dudes in high school and college who wanted to be fighter pilots, but had no idea how. You know,
Wow.
And the internet hadn't developed enough at that point to where like every question was answered. So I just created a book. Literally, I pretended I was sitting down next to a 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid who wanted to go in the military, and I just answered every question. It was about a 150-page book.
That's cool.
And what I actually got paid to do was to learn. Like, I didn't know anything about business, dude. I didn't know anything about marketing or positioning or branding, communication. I know how to tell a story properly.
Yeah.
And so I got paid to learn. I got paid to mentor actually some really amazing kids too. Like there's a lot of people in the military now because of my material, you know. That was kind of the beginning of business for me. I started a second business that got really successful. I sold the first one actually just a few years ago. And then, so what happened was, as I started to approach 7 figures, like revenue wise, people started to ask me to come speak at their events and just like share some strategies. And I call this my aw shucks era because, like, I mean, I've been speaking for almost 20 years, right? So I kind of like know what I'm doing. But back then, dude, I didn't know anything, right? All I knew was I was just going to tell them some strategies out of my story. And it sounded like, oh, shucks, because I didn't know. And like, first of all, I didn't know what I was doing was impressive. I just thought everybody kind of did that. And second, it was very clunky. Like I watched a video of me giving a speech from 2008. I don't know if you ever watch yourself like from 15 years ago.
It's painful, man.
Like I was embarrassed for 2008 me. You know, I was like, why did you ever wear that shirt? Oh my gosh, Izod, you know? But I guess everybody has to learn it somewhere.
It's true.
And so what happened from that was, I mean, it's so cargo pants. I don't know. But so anyway, so what happens is you start to learn. And so I would do these talks, and then people would come up to me and they would say, hey, can I take you to lunch to pick your brain? You know? And I would go and I would help these folks, and my lunch, what I called free lunch lessons, turned into actually a consulting advisory practice. Wow. Where I would literally just get asked questions from people and I would give them advice, and they would go off and do the advice. And for the most part, they were very successful. Not all the time. You know, sometimes people didn't implement it properly, or I gave them, you know, advice that I wish that I hadn't or whatever. But for the most part, it worked. And by the way, this is why I'm still a cessationist. And all during this time, I look back, it's amazing to see how God moves in your life, right? I look back and I can see what happened to me, by the way, back in 2008 was God gave me a gift of the Spirit called word of wisdom, right? So we talk a lot about word of knowledge, and, you know, and I certainly flow in that as well. Like everyone I think does who's connected really. But what happened was God gave me this very unique gift to be able to look at a business, like an entrepreneur's business venture, and give them a really simple answer to an unbelievably complicated problem that worked. And if you understand wisdom, which I know you do, wisdom is always very simple. Wisdom, literally, when God delivers wisdom, you're like, oh man, that was like, wait, why didn't I think of that? Yeah. Wisdom is always really simple to implement, very easy to understand. And so I started working with business owners, and next thing you know, people are doubling, tripling, 10xing their business, living life more vibrantly, making a lot more money, and actually like working a lot less, which normally if you're going to make more, you have to work more. And people were doing the opposite. And so I started doing my own events, started writing my own books. And I haven't even told the part of the story where God started speaking to me, but that was really the beginning of my business, and kind of where I am now. Like in business is similar, but a lot different.
Dude, that's wild. I want to go back just a sec to the fighter pilot days, like, because I don't often have a fighter pilot on the podcast. I have one other friend actually who's in BraveCo who is becoming a fighter pilot right now, which is so cool.
Really?
Yeah. Guy named Joshua. He's right now. Yeah, literally he's in training and sends me pictures of him in a jet and all that stuff, which is so cool. What was your main takeaway from that experience? What do you feel like you walked away with from those years?
Man, that's such a good question. I do a lot of interviews, and I don't think I've ever actually been asked that question before.
Hmm.
I will tell you just a couple things. I mean, the first thing is I did not join the Marine Corps with a very high view of myself. Romans 12:3 says you should think of yourself, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. I had the opposite issue. I thought of myself far, far less,
Yeah.
and I could told it kind of like my intro. I was actually a pretty good pilot. Like I was good at what I did. But when I showed up, I thought I was kind of second class, and acted like that for a while, by the way. What happens though in military training, it's fascinating. So when you show up, like for example, if you're going to learn to be a civilian pilot, fly around in Cessnas, which I did before I went into the military, it could take you weeks before you actually fly an airplane by yourself, like before you solo an airplane. In the military, it takes about 3 days. And
Wow.
those 3 days are a massive fire hose. I mean, you're literally in an airplane for the first time trying to figure out like what's what. And then 3 days later, you're flying that thing around all by yourself and you've already flown 8 hours in this airplane, right? 21 days later, you're doing full aerobatics. Like you are doing things with an airplane that 21 days before would have made you throw up on yourself, and this is normal people. This isn't like, I mean, I know, the Top Gun movies would help you think that fighter pilots are sort of like cream of the crop, but like with a lot of like normal dudes that showed up, dudes that failed kindergarten and stuff, so what happened was the first thing that just blew my mind was what happens when you expect something of someone. Like they expected a level of excellence and perfection in a pilot. And because they expected it, we just delivered it. And really regular pilots just consistently delivered over and over and over again. The second thing was just the power of training and repetition, man. The training system in the Navy, which is where the Marine Corps pilots learn how to fly, is with Navy instructors and Navy airplanes. It is built for success, man. They push people through fast. They teach you how to do things well. It's systematically driven. So there's not a lot of like, Maverick kind of had like some made up moves that he did in that movie. That does not happen. You learn how to be a steely eyed killer. And the crazy thing is, dude, like 3 years later, you're taking off and landing on aircraft carriers and fighting in combat. You're trusted with missiles I shot missiles off my airplane that were $250,000 missiles that the government had paid for. And I know like government procurement and everything like that. And I'm 25, 24 and a half, 25 years old. It's unbelievable to think about what we do. And you come back and land on an aircraft carrier and the person who's directing you as a taxi director is 18 years old, and it just goes to show what, number one, expectations will do. And number two, what training will do. It's the same thing. I like when I talk to business owners, I talk to them about this, same as I talk to dads, right? If you want your kids to grow in maturity and wisdom and excellence and to perform as adults, then expect them to. For years, I used to tell my son, I have two boys, I have 4 kids and I have 2 boys. For years, I used to tell my son, dude, what's wrong with you? Like when he would do something, wrong. And as I started to learn the idea of expectations and persuasion, I actually changed that verbiage. I literally just said this to him like recently. I changed the verbiage to, hey man, that's not who you are. Yeah. Like the way you're treating your sister right now, that's not the person you are. You're a kind person. You're a very good person, but you're not treating her very well. And that's not who you are. And it's literally the same thing in the sense that I'm just correcting a set of behavior, but it's totally different as to what goes on in a person's head. I expect him to be a man,
Yeah.
And so expectations was huge. And the second part was training. Much of life is training. And I learned that later on. We'll talk about this. I know when I started really having a conversation with God about business and understanding how to ask really good questions and get good answers. But that comes down to training too, man. Like you've seen some crazy stuff from the stage before because you grew up in this world. I didn't. But all of a sudden when I'm up on stage, like I wasn't even from the world that I'm in now and that you're in. Like all of a sudden 6-7 years ago, I found myself up on stage hearing something from God and actually speaking to someone like full details about parts of their life. And I'm like, whoa, where did that one come from? Like super risky type move from the stage. But a lot of that had to do just with the way things that I was trained. So yeah, the military expectations and training is one of those things you can overlay almost anything.
Gosh, man, that's it's so wild because so many men, I think so many men aren't successful because of the way that they see themselves, right? And so, I mean, you're only gonna step up to the level that you believe that you can. And with so many men not having a father or an active father in their life. Um, so many guys look at themselves and they just don't think that they can do it. And so therefore they're just living so far below their potential. I've talked about this before too. Like human beings are capable of so much. I mean, physically, like, I don't know if you know this, but we can outrun a horse in distance physically. Like we can, a human being can actually run further, last longer than a horse can run. And yet, very few of us tap into, I mean, just running a 5K, everyone's like, I ran a 5K. Well, I have a friend who ran 350 miles in 5 days, climbing 10,000 feet of elevation every single day, which is wild, right? Like that, he's just nonstop. He's such a beast. And yet, I get excited because I ran a 5K. And the truth is, like, I'm living so far below my potential in the running world, which I'm not trying to become a runner, but how far below our potential are we living in regular life, like the life that God's given us to live, simply because we didn't have systems set up. We didn't have a ecosystem that said you were built and designed for greatness. Greatness isn't something that few people can achieve. It's something that everyone can achieve. Let me teach you. Let me show you. Let me give you a system to build confidence, to get stronger, to be sharper, to make decisions quicker. And honestly, I love that about the military, but I love that you went through that, because man, how much did that shape you for this next season of your life? And I always tell guys like who are struggling with confidence comes through competency, right? It comes through doing. Like when you first got to fighter pilot school, you didn't just go like, man, I know I can crush this. I'm the man. I'm going to blow this out of the park. And honestly, unless you're arrogant, no one should, because none of those guys have done it before. But it's those small steps, right? It's in winning those little tiny battles, doing those small little drills, learning how to do these little tiny things, that you start to build this confidence that I'm capable, I'm going to be able to do that. You hear somebody's testimony, you're looking at an instructor who started out like you. And so many guys forget this simple principle that it's not that you can't do it. It's not that Ed Rush or Jason Valentin has more talent or more success or God loves us more. It's literally, we had a model, a process, somebody that believed in us, somebody that coached us along. My dad gave me challenges. That's how I grew in confidence. I was given something that somebody else wasn't. They have to change the way they see themselves. Like, what do you say to like, I was thinking about this earlier when I was thinking about our podcast. Like, where do you feel like most men, where do you feel like they get it wrong? And then like, what's the first step in becoming a successful man?
Yeah, good, man. Good, good. By the way, what you said is unbelievably important. How you laid that out also is really important. The way that you see things is very accurate, just so you know. So, and it's heartbreaking, by the way, especially if you work with people that are world changers, or at least who are called to be world changers. Your dad actually told a story once. I was with him at an event. We were both speaking. He told a story about a dream he had of a bird in a cage, and he was admiring the cage. And then God said, "Yeah, don't admire the cage. You're the bird." And my experience, by the way, I thought it was really, really great that he told that story as honestly as he told that story. But by the way, my experience with working now, like hundreds of thousands of I've worked with hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs, and 615 of them I worked one-on-one with for at least a year. I'm talking about like knee to knee people that I'm actually advising and consulting. And I can tell you from experience, these are, by the way, these are people who, some of them are starting businesses, startups. Some of them are making 8, 10, 15, 25, 40 million a year. Like that range, right? 615 people. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that of the 615, exactly 0 of them were either over marketing, over promoting, or seeing themselves as higher than they are. Every one of them actually had to be encouraged to like see themselves in a better light, or like a more honorable light. And so it comes down to identity, right? So we talk a lot, especially in the church, about identity. What we don't talk about is the activity that comes after the identity, right? So like, it's important to know who you are. That's really important. But when a man understands, I'm a son of God, that's really important. When a man understands, hey, I'm a partner with God. God's a partner with me. Like, that's a really important step too. But what you actually do with that is the most important thing. Like, it's one thing to believe it. It's another thing to actually work it out in your daily life. Like, it's one thing for Ed to say, hey, you're underplaying this, man. Like, you're like this guy, like, that's got this great franchise business. You sell $40 million made $40 million last year selling franchise. You're constantly underplaying yourself. What I need you to do is just be a little bolder, like, just push it a little bit, like, encourage people to take the next step. And they'll go, but you don't understand. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, take the next step. Sometimes you actually have to go out there and say it, right? So I'm fascinated, by the way, with space. One of my goals is to, walk on the moon and colonize a planet. And, we'll be able to do all that as we get more innovative. But so I was thinking, I was on a walk today, and I've got this event that I'm doing next week, and I'm trying to encourage the theme of the event. It's a business event, but the theme is 1,000x. I want people to start to think about what 1,000 times increase would look like, because Deuteronomy 1:11 says, may God bless you 1,000 times. So if it says it in the Bible, it's possible as long as we put it into action. And 1,000 times, by the way, means if an entrepreneur is making $1 million, now they're making $1 billion. If the entrepreneur is making $100,000, they're making $100 million. Like, it's a huge leap, you know, 1,000x better in your marriage, 1,000x better in your parenting. That's night and day, right? And I was thinking about this because I was like, what's the issue? Why do we think about ourselves? Why do we always think about ourselves wrong? Like, we get it wrong a lot, And what I started to kind of see some pictures. And by the way, when I talk about the church, I always tell people this, like, when I talk about the church, if I say something that sounds critical, it's not. I'm just debriefing like a fighter pilot does, right? Because I'm a member of the church too, and a lot of the things I'm about to talk about, I participated in. So I'm not like criticizing someone. I'm just saying, like, we can do better.
Yeah, it's all good.
So when I grew up in the church in the 80s and 90s, I mean, I was told, like, that you kind of have to you shouldn't, like, talk about yourself, you should, like, talk about other people. And that's pretty true for the most part, unless, like, you're on a podcast and someone's asking you to tell your story, then tell the story. You know what I'm saying? And there was this emphasis on sort of like, hey guys, like, the really important things are what the church does, like evangelism and discipleship. But yeah, I mean, like, your sports thing isn't that big of a deal. And the business thing is, like, kind of a necessary evil. Like, that was the world that I lived in, where there was a massive separation between mission, the world's mission, and, like, the church, And so what it served to do, basically, was kind of put dudes into, like, a little box. And also what it served to do was leave a void, like seats of government, music, arts, industry, all the things, frankly, that people in your movement and mine are trying to, frankly, like, get back, really, because we lost those things. And I really admire Bethel, by the way, for what you've done. I told your dad this when we were together last time. Like, I was mentored by because I'm very new to this stream. I learned all this stuff long before I was connected to anything, but I was mentored by quite a few people in Bethel simply through YouTube, and I was like, oh man, thankfully someone believes the same thing. I thought I was crazy. But I was walking this morning, I was thinking about it, and I was like the difference between 1 and 1,000,000 is, 999,999. But the difference between 1 and infinity is infinity, right? And the difference between 1 and 100,000 and the difference between 1 and 1,000,000,000,000 is a lot. But the difference between 1,000,000,000,000 and infinity is literally the same as 1 and infinity, And so David looks up at the stars and he says, when I consider your heavens, the moon and the stars which you created, what is man that you care for him? The first thing David says when he looks at the majesty and the magnitude of God is, he's like, who am I? I am so small. And the very next sentence out of his mouth is, he says, but you made us a little lower than God. And by the way, you can translate that however you want to. The words Elohim, that word in the Old Testament is translated God more times than anything. The bottom line is what David said simultaneously is, I am so small, and man, that's crazy, I'm so big. Because when you realize how big God is, you realize you're really small. But when you realize how big God is, you realize, wait a second, he's interested in me? He's so big, but he's interested in me. And he's interested in this conversation with me about my life and my business. That makes you big. That actually makes you really important, right? And so you could be 1 or you could be 1,000,000,000,000, and it doesn't matter because God's still infinity, right? The distance between you and God is still really big. The point, though, is a lot of times really good believing men, career guys, or entrepreneurs are thinking of themselves as 1 when God's like, hey, how about you start thinking of yourself as 1,000,000,000,000? And when you start thinking of yourself properly, the activity should follow behind that. And I will just tell you, you will not have a problem. Like I've told my entrepreneurs, you push it. Like you push it out there and I'll tell you if you need to pull it back. And I've never found one that got too far. We're always worried about humility. And just so you know, the humility is like the most brash, arrogant people are brash and arrogant because they don't know who they are. Like you find somebody who, I could name some names, but like you find somebody who always has to tell you about their achievements. That's a person who doesn't understand who they are. If you get identity right and activity behind it right, you're going to know who you are and you're going to be unbelievable in the world to be able to change what you want to change. So
yeah,
talking about a topic I love.
I always think that it's insecurity that breeds, what was I just talking about? We were just talking, it's insecurity. Like when you're struggling, talking about yourself, ultimately it's insecurity, right? Like you have to go back to finding out who God's called you to be. Okay. I do want to break this down a little bit more because honestly, I've been in church forever and in this stream forever. And it is one thing. I'll say Christians love their theory. We love our theory. I love my theory. And theory is good. Like you have to have a theory, because then you have to go flesh it out and find out if it's real. But a lot of stuff just stays theoretical because it is so painful and risky and challenging and hard to actually make it tangible. And as a counselor for the past 20 years, I'll be 20 years at Bethel this year. I can't just say to somebody like, love your wife, if they're in marriage counseling. I have to go like, let's talk about how to love your wife. Let's talk about why it's not working. You got to get really practical. And I think when we talk about identity, like it's easy for me to go like, yeah. I understand identity in Christ and I could read you the verses and preach the message. But then when it gets to entrepreneurship, like if I'm honest, even leading BraveCo, my dad asked me this year, he said, what keeps you up at night? And I said, what keeps me up at night is I know I've been called to lead BraveCo and to lead men, but I don't have a direct path from God. Like this is what you need to do. And this is how you need to do it. Like in some ways it would be so much easier if God said, do 3 stadiums this year, do 5 discipleship pieces, do this. But when you don't have that, right? Or when I didn't hear that, and I just know like I'm called to lead men, I'm called to disciple men and see them get healed and trained up and so that they can reproduce themselves like Christ came and reproduced himself here. Like that's what we're doing here at BraveCo. How do I do that? And we were talking earlier, like it's so much easier to start with the wisdom of God, knowing I'm called here. But then I end up in like, okay, what's the 5 next steps that I need to think up, that I need to strategize, that I need to do to move this thing forward? And even in my own personal life I'm giving you a lot of content here, even my own personal life with my own finances, right? Like right before I walked in here, my wife and I were on the phone and she said, hey, we need to make X amount of money a year just to break even. And I'm like doing the math. I'm like, okay, yeah, like frick, that's just to break even, babe. She's like, yeah, that's just to break even. I'm like, God dang, man. And strategizing in my mind, like, okay, how am I going to wrap my mind around that? My first go-to isn't always, I'm a son of God. He's got a bunch of ideas for me. He's going to give me a clear path. I need to spend some time with the Lord. Often my go-to is, I'm a son of God. I've been blessed. I got to figure out how the heck I'm going to how I'm going to grab these 2 ends and stretch them to make them meet. Like, can you just practically take me through? I mean, just do this on me. It's fine.
Great.
Like,
That's great.
Where do I start with it? And I mean, I understand how to hear God's voice. If you're sitting in front of me, I could get a prophetic word for you, but to me, it feels different. At least it feels different. It feels like a different element to actually go, I'm going to sit down and strategize with God about my business or my personal income, honestly, in a way that I trust that I've got it, that I heard, and So I'd love you just to whatever. I mean, I
Yeah,
just threw you a
that's
ball,
beautiful, dude.
like hit that.
It's awesome. Yeah. And this actually like the topic that I probably like to talk about the most, and probably because it's the most challenging thing to answer. So I love when it's I love when it's not like you walk through the Christian bookstore and 85% of the books are on this topic and yours is on the same topic. I like the ones where it's like the one no one talks about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So, and by the way, thank you for your transparency on the asking that question. I know you and I have had conversations in the past, and there's certainly more detail in the answer that I'm going to give you here. We'll just do that on the fishing trip. So, but so yesterday, 2 days ago, I had a coaching member in town, a client. I spent 5 hours. My first meeting is a 5 hour meeting. And my client, as a part of the questions he was asking me, he said, I need you to help me with my priorities. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that. And he said, why? And I said, well, I don't believe in that. I said, functionally, it doesn't work at all. He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, when I grew up, I was told God, family, business. That was my dad told me, like, God, family, business. I said, but if I followed that priority, I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now. I'd be home with my family. Actually, no, I wouldn't be with my family. I would be with God. So on a day-to-day, minute by minute, it doesn't actually work. It doesn't work at all. Right.
Yeah.
And so the actual priority, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Your actually priority is God. And that's pretty much it. He said, if you don't hate your family, your brothers and sisters and your mom and everybody, you can't even be part of the kingdom. Jesus was like really offensive about what we were talking about. You got to hate everybody. His point was the whole priority is God. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's it. Like, that's it. Now I'm going to talk about business and family in a second. So just, like, I have a business and a family, like, even though the priority obviously is God. So what ends up happening with dudes, okay, is you end up in a situation where someone's like, you got to have priorities and you have to like have balance, and guys are like, okay, yeah, I got to do that. And then you try to execute it in real life and you're like, I don't even know what balance is. Like, how do you do, what am I, like next week, I have a 3-day event, right? I'm going to be up on stage about 8 of the 12 hours of that event for 3 straight days. There's no balance in that at all.
No.
Okay. It is full on mission. Like, I was in an airplane once for 9 hours. You know how many times you have to pee yourself in a little bag for 9 hours? There's no balance. Okay.
Yeah.
But like, you take time off too. So my point though is sometimes guys get these like really pious platitudes that don't work. Right. And part of my like vision in the world is to try to give dudes things that like they can actually execute and it'll change their life. Right. And so the first thing I will tell you is my whole approach with God center is the mission. Right. So if you take God as this big orb, that's first, that's everything. And then around the outside, like the edge of an egg, like the shell of an egg, is the mission, because every man has a mission that God has called you to or is calling you to. And usually it's multiple missions. But my view of mission as a military person is when we get a mission that becomes everything. When the commander gives you a mission, your obedience to the commander, your honoring of the commander is to go off and do the mission, not to sit there and be like, oh, commander, you are so amazing. We love you, commander. To go do the mission, right? To go attack the target or whatever it is that you're to defend the airfield or whatever the thing that you're supposed to do. So the mission is everything, right? And I was watching, by the way, some of your previous episodes. You got some really great guests. Just really an honor to be here. And
Thanks,
and as I was going through some of those, one of the previous guests, I think 2 shows ago, you were talking about like the predominant male issue, like sort of the whole like a porn addiction situation. And I always tell people, if you talk, like, for example, if all people do is talk about the issue, like if I took my 15 and 16-year-old kids to the average Bible group that only talks about the problem, even though my kids probably haven't like you talk about something long enough, it sounds starting to sound really good. Like, why did everybody talk about this so much? It sounds great. And so my thing with guys especially is start with the mission. Because look, if you're red hot burning passionate for the Lord and your mission, frankly, those other things actually kind of become like, what was I so interested in that for? Like, those things actually start to go away. Now, we were talking before this, and this is really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to the actual execution in your life, right? So, and you mentioned finances. A lot of guys are trying to hear from God about that, or mission. Guys are trying to hear from God about that, or business. If you're in business can be very challenging. It can be very lucrative. It can also be very challenging. Anybody who's been in business, and I think there's probably a lot of people listening know,
Yep.
the number one lie at church is like, hey, how's business going? Oh, great. You're like, like that morning you looked at your bank account and it had a lower number than your credit card,
Yeah.
and you're like, everything's great. Everything's wonderful. I'm lying to you. That is like the entrepreneurial life, going from like one deal to another. My point though is, it's hard, right? And then you overlay sort of this conversation with God. And I specialize nowadays in teaching entrepreneurs how to ask God about their business. And like you said, like I have people, the crazy thing, by the way, this is a side point. I wrote this book, God Talks, and I actually wrote the book for atheists. I wrote this book for atheists and skeptics, and a lot of people have bought it who are atheists and skeptics. I've helped hundreds of people who are not believers literally have a conversation with God, which is fun.
That's
atheists,
awesome.
full on atheists. so much fun. But the biggest, I would say one of the biggest and frankly shocking to me things that have happened, that's happened over the last 9 months since the book has been out, is some of the world's most prophetically gifted, spiritually connected teachers. And I'm talking about, like, if I started naming names, you'd know exactly who they were, and everyone else listening to this would know who they are. People whose names who have come to me and told me about exercises that they've done from the book and the big breakthrough that they got in the exercise.
That's
now
awesome.
that kind of blew my mind. I'll be honest with you, because I haven't been around for a while, and I'm learning these things just as much as everyone's learning these things. But when somebody who I consider very influential says, hey man, I just did your second exercise and here's what I wrote down, and it totally blew my mind that my view of God was like this. And so my approach is always very simple. And I'm going to say how I work with entrepreneurs, but as you're listening, you can overlay it to whatever your situation is, your kids, you can overlay it to your marriage if you want to your business, to your work, to your career, to your future calling, whatever it is. And I'll just simply say that we were talking about this teaching tool that I have called Wisdom Pyramid. And Wisdom Pyramid has 5 layers. The bottom layer is reaction. Then there's data. The middle layer is knowledge. Then there's wisdom. And then there's divine wisdom. And what happens in most situations is good, well-meaning men and women of God will actually use divine wisdom. So you'll have a word, or you'll get a word from someone else. But most of their life lives in that middle zone, that knowledge zone. Yeah, so most people start at knowledge, start at divine wisdom, then kind of bounce into knowledge and kind of stay there. So someone might get an idea for their business through a conversation with God, but then they're going to hire a marketing coach and basically use actual like earth strategies to implement everything. And my point is, God is interested in telling you the big picture part of your business, but also down to the very details. And so a mature man in a walk with God is actually flipping on and off between the world and God. Literally, I'm not even kidding you. When I'm on stage next week, I'll be teaching, and as I'm teaching, I'll be having this conversation with God about the next thing. So that's the kind of thing that when you can overlay both of those together, man, you can crush it. Now, the order, by the way, you always start with divine wisdom. So this wisdom pyramid I teach, you start right at the top. You start at divine wisdom. Then, and this is really important, you go down to human wisdom. So there are people who are gifted at being able to show you how to execute at a level that you want to execute. And it's been my experience that, there's moments, by the way, you've probably had these before. There's moments where God will just start to really reveal some things for you. What is more common, at least in my experience, is God will begin to reveal some things to you. There are often things that you've kind of made off limits that God usually doesn't push through. But if you surround yourself with people who have wisdom, what ends up happening is God will give this person an idea, and this person a dream, and this person a vision, and this person will have just read this article. Like, I was just thinking about you, Ed. And when you actually do this in some sense of community, what you end up with is like a brilliant idea afterwards that's really easy to execute, that absolutely will work with some adjustment, will make you a lot of money, and with less work and less stress, right? And so sometimes guys won't hear from God. That's mistake kind of number one. Sometimes people will just hear from God, but not process it in a sense of community, And then other people will do both of those things, but not implement and execute. And that's really like the 3 steps, right? You hear from God, you process it with people that you know, like, and trust, who have wisdom in the specific area that you're looking for. By the way, if you don't have that, find it. Okay. So I'm in the business world. Like, if you don't have good business advice, well, find people who like have walked the path,
Yeah.
and like been down that road before and have some success under their belt and can be like, come on, walk with me for a second. Let me just tell you, it's not gonna be that bad. I know the finances are tough right now. Like, it'll get better, and then you execute. And by the way, I have a longer discussion about this. I'll kind of wrap it up here in like 20 seconds. After executing, especially if you're an entrepreneur, actually in any field, after executing, you should expect it probably won't work the first time, maybe not even the second time, because the world that we live in requires constant adjustment, like a missile trying to hit a target. So that's kind of big picture stuff as far as that goes. And I love talking about this stuff. This is half of my event this week, is that whole setup, wisdom pyramid, going directly to God for the details in your business, then getting in community, then executing. You make a lot of money that way if you do it right.
Yeah. I mean, I love it because it's really simple, but also makes a lot of sense. What's your favorite way to connect with God, and hear from him? I'm sure that you get a lot of people that go, I have a hard time hearing from God. And like, what's a strategy to hear from God?
Great. Awesome. Super question. So the first thing is, the most common question I get, over 10,000 people have been through my God Talks process. And by far the most common question I get is, how do I know this is God talking? Or how do I even know? Like, the real fun thing for me, again, has been, I've gotten that question from atheists and skeptics, but I've also gotten that question from some really, really well-known Christians who are like, how do I know what I wrote down? And I'm like, yes, we all have the same question. Okay. And so the first thing I will simply tell you is, there's an idea that the more mature you get at hearing from God, the more you'll be able to separate your voice from God's. And what I can tell you is, the longer and deeper I've walked with God, the more those two voices sound a lot more similar. Okay. And gosh, dude, if somebody had told me this 12 years ago, Paul says we have the mind of Christ. Psalm 37:4 says, you delight yourself in the Lord, he'll give you the desires of your heart. Right. So I always tell business owners, like, you might not even have to ask God what he wants from you. You might just want to ask yourself, what do you want? Because sometimes what's on your heart is the thing God put there years and years ago, because when you delight yourself in the Lord, he'll give you the desires of your heart. And it's fascinating that God would put so much trust in us. But as you grow in your conversation with God, your brains begin to merge. And I will tell you, dude, I used to be so clear. Like when I was working with a business owner, I used to be so clear. Okay, I'm hearing this from God. Okay, this is from me. Nowadays, sometimes I'm like, okay, look, I'm just going to tell you, I'm not sure if this is from God or from me, but let's just roll with it.
Yep.
Because sometimes your mind and the mind of Christ sort of come together. So what I will tell you is simple, is really simple. If you're new at this, if you don't have a conversational walk with God, if that's not part of your life, just start with 10 or 20-minute exercises. I mean, I mentioned this book. There's 7 20-minute exercises. I've got audios that go along with them. You literally ask some really basic questions from God. You write and journal the answers, and you just give yourself some space. I personally nowadays, I don't use anything. I literally sit in my chair pretty much every morning for about 20, 30 minutes. Maybe I'll read the word a little bit, kind of prime the pump, close my eyes, do some breathing, get myself into the zone, connect with the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, walk into whatever room or area, the field or whatever it is that I'm invited into that particular day. And we just have a conversation. I call that process, by the way, downloading your instructions for the day. I will often just ask the Lord, what are my instructions for the day? He almost always gives it to me. It's very simple. And by the time I'm done with those things, I feel like I've had a really great day and accomplished a lot. And so, yeah, so if you can just get some time and get away. And then the last thing I will tell you is, by the way, of all the advice I give today, this is the one that is the most likely to get blown off. Okay. But this is the one that will push the needle for you more than anything, which is solitude. More than anything in the world that we live in, men need to be away. Okay. And by the way, I love fishing and hunting trips, and that's getting away from technology is really important for that reason. But when I say solitude, I mean you in like the woods, you in like a cabin, you walking down the beach, minimum hour. And I've done this up to 21 days. Okay. So like 21 days off the grid, completely disconnected, just me and God for 21 days. That's a complete other.
That's wild.
I do before my events, I'll do minimum 24 hours, normally about 3 straight days, completely disconnected. No, nothing on the agenda, literally nothing on the agenda. Me, my Bible, my journal, and the Lord. And I will tell you, every time I do this, near 100% of the time, every single time I get away with solitude over the 2 or 3 days, I'm like, nothing really happened. Like God didn't walk through the wall or whatever, or like, I didn't have a vision or anything like that. But the moment I get back into the world, I'm like, whoa, something happened. I just didn't see the process happening there. So, like I said, that last one is the one most easily to get blown off. People are like, oh, I'm so busy. I'm like, no, you're so busy. You need to do it. And just carving out the time to be able to do that it's literally changed my life. There's very few things I would use that phrase for, but that's definitely one of them.
Man, I love it. In counseling, I was never taught how to do counseling. Like a lot of people go to school for it, and honestly, I think that's awesome. It's a really great thing to do if you want to help people and professionally, especially. I learned because at 12 or 13, my dad basically, I told my dad I don't want to go to youth group anymore, and my dad looked at me and said, "Oh, son, like sounds like you're going to youth group for yourself." And I said, "Yeah, I think I am going to youth group for yourself." I thought it was a good thing. And he said, "Son, going to youth group for yourself is the lowest level of living as a believer." And I just felt crushed. And then he said, "Look at me." So I look in his eyes, and my dad has these really intense eyes. And he said, "People need you. They need what you have, son. Like you're great at working with people." He said, I want you to go and I want you to find people that are hurting, find people that have what you need and give it to them. And so every week I just was on a mission. Literally, I was on a mission from 13 years old on. And that's how I started to find my love for working with people in, thousands and thousands and thousands of appointments, sitting down with people from 13 years old on, of all different walks of life. What I learned is the same thing when you're speaking, when someone's talking to me in a counseling appointment, I hear God like I hear my own voice. And I've done it for so long that I trust it. I know, I know that I know. And in that setting, they'll be talking. I won't know the answer. And then I never even sweat it anymore, because I literally know it's going to drop in my head. Like he's going to give me the answer, and it drops into my head. And I've learned, because I've spent so much time asking that question. What I didn't realize for a long time is, while I'm sitting there, I developed this relationship with God where I'm expecting him to show up. I'm asking him questions.
Yeah.
And I think where I go wrong, I'm telling on myself, I've hopefully made this podcast all about me and guys can learn, but I often don't ask the question. And then I don't ask the question with the expectation to hear. In the counseling world, I always ask the question, and I ask it with the expectation to hear, and I do hear. But more importantly, I have the confidence to move forward with what he's told me, because I've done it for so long. And it was the only thing I had to go on when I was so young. I think that's why I got so strong at it, is I didn't have any other training or teaching. And so that gift in my life, like I just learned to use it. I learned to trust it. I learned to run with it. And so now it's really easy to hear in that field. And it is funny how in a different area of my life, I tend to lean more on my own knowledge and wisdom, just in the sense of like, I think this is a good idea, but I'm not actually even trying to ask God like, hey, give me a strategy today for X problem, or for my kids, or for my marriage, and then trying to put the pieces together. I saw that modeled for me with my dad in business. I remember going through those years when he was learning to hear from God, and he would literally wake up in the morning and ask God, about his day, like you're doing. And so I watched that, and I know that that's possible. For me, like a good takeaway for this is like, I got to get back to the place where I'm expecting God to speak to me about the other areas of my life, not just this one area of my life. It's real. And inviting him in, because God is sometimes, like once in a great while, God will interject himself into your life, like Saul on the road to Damascus, or whatever, Balaam's donkey. But very rarely, in my experience, does God just interject himself and go, here's what you need to do. It's so much more often, I'm seeking, if you knock, right? If you knock and you keep knocking, that door's going to open up, and you're going to get to go walk through. The other thing that I think is important is, we have to give God something to work with. In 2017 and 18, God started to talk to me, and this is what he said to me: I want you to give me something I can bless. And I was like, it's a very interesting thing for God to say, because I had 3 kids and a wife, and like, you have something that just bless me with however you want. But I knew specifically that he was talking about the men's stuff that was in my heart. The truth is, I didn't want to start it because I didn't know where to start, because all I had was this desire to help men. Well, there's 100,000 ways that you can help men. There's a million different ways. I didn't know the path. And so he kept putting more and more pressure on me just with this word: I want you to give me something I can bless. I want you to give me something I can bless. And what I have done is I've moved forward. I have moved forward. I have taken steps. And so I often tell people, like, you may not know 100% if what you're hearing is God, but 100% that if you don't take steps, if it is God talk, you're not giving him anything to work with. And I often think, like, God cares more about us moving than he does us. Did I hear God's voice perfect? And I know it probably sounds like I'm contradicting myself, because I'm being so honest as to say, in this area of my life, I don't always hear God. But the truth is what I resort back to is, like, I know my part, my responsibility is to move forward, is to keep taking steps, is to keep believing that he is lighting the path that's in front of me, and he's going to make a billion adjustments between where I'm at and, well, I'm never going to get to a final destination. And so I don't know if you have some thoughts about that stuff, but to me, like, that's how I have learned to, like, listen, if I'm not sure that it's God or not God, I have to make a decision. I have to keep moving forward. I have to keep, believing and pressing in. And I do know, like, for me, getting more intentional with sitting down, I wrote down some stuff, with sitting down and going, okay, I need the divine wisdom from God and a strategy that then I can wrap some human knowledge around it, and then some execution and strategy. So anyways, that is literally where I'm at.
I definitely have some thoughts on this. So,
Yeah.
People ask, they'll come up to me and ask me questions, because I teach people how to hear from God, specifically about their money or their business. And, but I always tell people, I said, look, on a scale of 1 to 10, hearing God for me, I'm probably like a 6.
Yeah.
I maybe it was a 5 at one point. I was probably like a 1 at one point. I was probably like a 6. I'm getting a little better. But I'm probably like a 6, now, if I'm like, for example, like you and I are together and somebody comes in the room and says, hey man, I've got this challenge, and I start hearing from God for that person, it's probably like a 10.
Yeah.
Same for you. Right.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, if you and I are sitting and talking about your business, it's more like an 11. Like, when I'm in my zone,
It's awesome.
doing the mission that God has for me, it's like, I kid you not, I'll walk in with nothing, and I'll go, well, let me just pray. And I'll go, Lord. And the moment I say that, it's like, do. All right, let me just start writing on the whiteboard. And so the first thing is, I will tell you, it is a lot easier to hear from God when you're on your mission than it is when you're not.
Yeah.
When you're just kind of sitting around trying to figure out, like, what to do on the weekend or whatever. It's when you're connected to the calling that God has for you. That's, by the way, that's the reason why you hear so well when you're in those meetings, because it is your zone. It's your lane. It's your gifted area that God has called and anointed you to.
Yeah.
And boom, here you go. Now, hearing for yourself. So I love, dude, you've been very transparent. So I'm going to do the same thing. And I guess I have been, but I'm going to just tell you a story. So last summer, I came off an event in the summer. We did a big event in July. And right after the event, I just sat down with the Lord, got my journal out, and he went, I've never had this happen before, by the way. He went month by month for 18 months.
Wow.
And literally just told me month by month. And I was like, this is really cool. I'm like writing all this stuff down, because like I have barely gotten 2 months, but like month by month by month by month, what to expect. And it kind of blew me away. But I will say so he said that was July. He said the first thing he said was August and September will be a little, he said, more of the same. And the word he used was some lack. In other words, he was telling me it was going to be a difficult 2 months financially. It's basically what he said. And just, that came true, completely true. It was one of those months where, try as you might, there's very little revenue coming in. It just, especially in a business like mine, events and coaching and stuff, it's a lot of up to somebody else to make the decision. And It was a hard 2 months. But he told me in July. And I remember I was sitting with my journal and I said, because I've had some bad months, dude. Like I've had some really bad, I have some great months too, you know? But I've had some bad months. And I remember sitting with my journal and I said, how come you've never told me that before? And he said, you were never listening to that.
Wow. Wow.
Basically,
Yeah.
what he was saying was, I would have told you, but the moment I started talking about that topic, you threw it out the window. Some positive thinking thing or whatever. I was like, I don't want to hear that. No, we're going to succeed. And so what happened was there was this beautiful moment where God actually trusted me with a piece of information that in the past I would have rejected because I didn't want to hear it. And so it opened up this whole idea to me and this whole new door of a conversation with God to where, and I haven't perfected this, I don't think I ever will, but I'm definitely getting better at it, where you receive what you receive from him with no editing, with no expectation. There was a time that he spoke to me about a trial, this really significant trial that I did not want to experience at all. And I will just say, he and I had a long conversation about it, and there was a lot of detail. And at the end, I just said, okay, I trust you.
Wow.
And the moment I said that, it was unbelievable, man. The moment he said that, he goes, okay, then I'm not going to bring that now. And I was like, wait a second, did I like pass the test or something like that? The whole point of whatever God was going to bring to me, and I knew what it was to get me to the point where I was only looking at him face to face and going, nothing else is important except for me and you. And I got there in like 10 seconds instead of 10 months, you know? And I'm not trying to say that to talk about a level of maturity or whatever. I'm just simply saying, if I had a time machine and I go back and teach myself this one principle, it's like, come with an open mind and an open heart, and just know he's the most important thing anyway. And as long as you have him, you'll be fine. And man, you'll hear some stuff that you never thought you would hear before. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I started asking God for detail, for like a lot more detail. My experience is he'll give you big things, big ideas and verses and numbers and things that like are really connected to you. But the more detail you ask, because he's really interested in the conversation, the more you'll get. And so when I've been working with business owners, like similar to you, that's my zone. You're working in the counseling area where that's my zone, and I'll give someone a word that I hear from God. But there's a huge difference. You've seen it too, between like, you know, I see that you have the mantle of Joseph and anointing of leadership on you. Like kind of anyone can say that. And I'm not trying to like wreck that sort of prophetic stream. I'm just saying sometimes there's these really general things. And sometimes there's like, I was talking to the business owner and I was like, Lord, I want to hear something very specific, because I just want to show them how much you love them and where you're calling them. And I literally said, the deal you're talking about right now is God's payment for a deal that you lost 3 years ago. In fact, 3 years ago, like almost to this date, there was a very significant deal that went flying out the window, and God's paying you back now with interest. And the guy goes, oh my gosh, 3 years ago, that was December of 2021. In December of 2021, I had a $14 million check that somebody stole from me because he didn't pay me for whatever. And I was like, that's cool. It's like 3 years ago. You know what I mean? My point though, is I could have said, hey, there was some time in the past where you had money due to you. And I said, God, give me something specific, because when you do it like that, it really like nails the thing. Right.
Yeah.
And
True.
so all of that, as you're listening to this, all that is available to you. Like I am not a person who grew up in this at all. Like I kind of learned a lot of this stuff by accident, trial and error, like trying to make it really simple. And by the way, I think it's a benefit that I didn't grow up in like, I mean, it would have been awesome to be around Bethel, like when you guys were all growing up and stuff, but like coming from the outside in and learning this kind of like a lot of it on my own in the business context where nobody ever talks about this stuff anywhere, kind of enabled me to look at it kind of with some fresh eyes, you know, and look at making it really simple so that people could execute it and understand it. And it's amazing. And that journey, let me tell you, the world's ready for you and your gift. As you're listening to this, like we have a plan to take over government, like in a good way. I don't mean like violently or anything. I mean like in a really good way, like to actually be in charge. We have a plan to buy Disney. You know, we're talking about buying organizations like Disney, New York Times, CNN, like actually own organizations like this. And the reason I always tell people that is like, you can boycott Disney and they don't care. Like what? Who cares if you go? They don't care if you go.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? What? Oh, they're not going to miss your $11.99 Disney Plus. You know what they will? You know what they will pay attention to? The CEO. You know, the board of directors, like the people who are in charge.
Yep.
And so my whole thing is like, you get connected with God, you find your mission, you hear from him conversationally, then you get on your mission and let's go change the world because God's ready to like give something huge to you. So,
dude, I love that.
that's the end of
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I love it. And it's all about changing your perspective in what God wants to do in your life. And it's back to the very beginning of what we were talking about, right? Is if you never actually expect that God wants to use you in a mighty way, that just like David and Paul and Moses, all these guys that we look at in the Bible, like I started out BraveCo, at the conference last year, I started out my talk by saying God's looking for deliverers, and his idea of a deliverer isn't some great, incredible man. It's you. It's all of us, right? And when we look all through the Bible at the deliverers that he chose, whether it was Nehemiah or it was Daniel, or they weren't these special guys. It was often these guys that didn't really have what it takes outside of God, but God is the X factor. And like Moses, who felt like he had a flaw and didn't feel like he had what it took, and was 80 years old, tending Jethro's sheep in the middle of, the desert, like God said, hey, now's your time. And I really do. I feel like, man, if we can get men to change the way that they see themselves and to partner with God and to actually say, Lord, I'm willing to believe that you've called me to something great, and sit down and actually steward that in their life and get around other men. And we talk about it a lot here, like a lot, like getting around other men who think like that, who believe like that, who are willing to pour into you is one of the best ways to actually steward that in your life. And it's just awesome, Ed, what you bring, what you carry, what you're spreading across the country in just your fire for life, but also your passion to release that in other people. I really admire. And man, thank you so much for coming on today and pouring out to our men and sowing into me personally. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's an honor, dude. It's an honor. I know we're going to get together sometime. So that will be awesome too. But I just really admire and honor what you've done with BraveCo. I've already told you this, but there's a lot of men's ministries out there, and there's very few that I admire. And I definitely admire what you're doing. I have some really close friends of mine who are in your smaller groups, and the stories, dude, are to like blow your mind. And frankly, I told you this already, but I'm jealous. Like I don't have that group here in San Diego that I would love to have, that you guys have up there in Bethel. So
it's cool, man.
Anyway, yeah, really cool what you guys are doing. Thanks for having me. It's really been an honor.
Thank you so much, Ed. BraveCo men, this week's challenge is easy, right? It's get before God and ask him some pointed questions. If you're lacking confidence, it's awesome because the Lord says, like, if you're lacking wisdom, in James, he says it, right? He talks about going through unexpected trials and having joy is what leads us through those trials and leads us to a place where we don't lack nothing. But he goes on to say, like, if you're lacking wisdom, ask God expecting. And it's a really cool part of the verse where he's saying, like, if you expect to hear me, then you're going to get what you expect. But if you don't, then you're like a double-minded man, right? Like you're not going to get anything. And so I just want to encourage you guys to, like, this week, kind of put your money where your mouth is. Sit down, carve out that hour slot or half an hour, 25-minute slot where you can go like, Lord, I've got some questions for you. And then let's take some steps forward, move those steps forward. Guys, if you enjoy what we're doing here at the podcast, please share it, like and subscribe, leave a comment. It helps us so much. Otherwise, men, we will see you next week on the BraveCo podcast. Stay brave, men. Hey, BraveCo men. Hopefully you loved this week's episode. Listen, if you have not subscribed to our podcast, you are already behind. Go ahead and click right here to subscribe to our podcast. And if you have not watched last week's episode, you can click right here and watch last week's episode. And listen, if you want to upgrade your wardrobe, you can check out some of our new hats that we have in stock and all our other swag. Go to braveco.org and you can look at our store there. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.